Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our most recent webinar in our Capital Education series. For anyone that doesn't know me, my name is Steve Vlasic. I'm a partner here at Ritchie May that handles our business development for our alternative investments practice. Ritchie May is a CPA firm that specializes in alternative investments, providing audit and tax services for well over 1,600 fund structures. This includes hedge, private equity, venture capital, real estate, and digital asset funds. As a CPA firm and trusted advisor, we always try to add value to our clients and friends in the industry, which is why we launched our Capital Raising Education series. When we speak to new fund launches, as well as existing funds, the topic that almost always comes up is capital raising and how to attract more investors. So here at Ritchie May, we decided to put the series together. Our goal is to put out multiple webinars, podcasts, and thought leadership publications, covering the many areas to consider as you are raising capital. We team up with industry experts within the capital raising environment to cover topics such as marketing landscape, the perfect pitch book, the due diligence process dealing with potential investors, how to work with custodians to bring in IRA money, and many other relevant topics. We really hope you enjoy this next episode in our Capital Raising Education series, and feel free to suggest any future topics you would like us to cover. Thank you.
Hello, and welcome to today's discussion. Today, our Capital Raising Education series is going to focus on really the role of LinkedIn for managers. This industry discussion is really because of our special guest today, Holly Singer. I'll have her introduce herself in just a moment. But my name is Felicia Mollison. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Ritchie May, and we are just so honored to have Holly and her expertise with us today. So thank you so much, Holly, for joining us. Would you take a few minutes and introduce yourself?
For sure. First, Felicia and Ritchie May, thank you so much. I'm excited to be here today and participate in this important discussion. I very much look forward to it. By way of background, I've been running a niche marketing communications firm for a few decades. We've specialized both by clientele and type of service, having worked with well over 100 clients in the alternative space, mainly private fund managers, some allocators across the spectrum of strategies that are noted here. We do have a two-pronged focus, both to enhance the way our clients communicate, whether we're creating or upgrading marketing materials, but also to raise visibility strategically through targeted PR, which does include LinkedIn.
So thank you, Holly. I think fund managers really have some basic questions about LinkedIn that you can break down into why should I use LinkedIn? When should I use LinkedIn? But most importantly, how do I do this? And I know that you have some very practical advice to share, so we want to really break it down and make it simple. But first, let's just start with the why. I think it comes down to some basic questions that I'd love for you to take us through. The first one is, what are the top 3 reasons I should appear on LinkedIn if I were a fund manager?
Sure. So with the marketing rule of 3 in mind, let's jump in here. The first reason is networking. LinkedIn drives relationship building at scale. I'm going to share just a few key metrics sourced from LinkedIn itself. Did you know this global community now exceeds 1 billion? That's not a million, 1 billion members and over 67 million company listings. It's growing. It's the largest social network for business. It's an important tool to network with industry professionals. The second important reason is credibility. What does that mean? Almost everyone, in terms of business contacts, looks up their new contacts or potential contacts online, just basic Google searches, and they all incorporate LinkedIn. So it's just kind of a ticket to credibility. I would say a current LinkedIn profile is really a minimum source of credibility. Third, expectation. The flip side of that credibility rationale is the risk of not using this tool. The expectation is that We all appear on this popular platform. People expect to connect on LinkedIn, and they expect to just take out their phone, use the QR code, and connect in a matter of minutes.
No, I get that. So there's a lot of people on this platform. Could you break it down a little bit more for us about the who is on this platform?
Sure, that's easy. It's almost everyone you know or everyone you want to meet at all levels. Professionals appear on LinkedIn. It's become highly popular.
So let's just maybe take a step. I know we talked about the reasons why, but really, what are the benefits for a fund manager being on LinkedIn?
Benefits, I'd like to align with the concept of branding. So just let's talk for a minute about that. So branding is intrinsically related to perception, reputation, and trust.
Right.
Some people think of branding as just their logo, but honestly, branding goes well beyond your logo, which is your visual brand. It's about messaging, and strong messaging helps you differentiate your firm's brand and reinforces trust in you and in your firm. So LinkedIn is just a platform that facilitates the sharing of content. And I'd just like to mention on a related note that strong content is a very, if not the most important factor driving SEO or search engine optimization. So keep that in mind for brand benefits.
That's so true. And so, along that line, I know that it requires some time and energy on behalf of the fund manager. What return on that time and energy investment really can they be expecting? Like, how do they know it's effective?
Metrics are important. Why would we undertake marketing projects without a way to measure them? That's really important. So there are lots of metrics on LinkedIn that you can measure to see the results. For example, your number of contacts, the number of profile views, the number of posts. These are all automatically tracked by LinkedIn. So where do you come in? What you need to do is monitor those metrics. It's very easy and it doesn't cost you anything. Those, by the way, those statistics apply to both individuals for you and your profile on LinkedIn, as well as to company profiles. So all of those, assuming that you have access to tracking your and updating your company profile and activity feed, all of those are quantitatively measured. So I encourage you to check out those metrics.
That's fantastic. I know also that you work with so many fund managers. Can you talk a little bit about, do you hear folks avoiding LinkedIn? And if so, what are those common reasons why? And even more importantly, what are the consequences of avoiding LinkedIn?
Honestly, those excuses seem laughable to me. I just expect people to be on LinkedIn, but a lot of folks aren't. So let me just share with you some of those excuses. I've had some managers say, I'm already on Facebook or I use Instagram. Well, that's great. If you're putting your favorite restaurant and menu items on Instagram, or you're sharing your family and personal milestones on Facebook, please do that. I'm not discouraging that. I also hear some managers say, I run a private fund and I'm not allowed to advertise. Okay, so, or maybe you're just too lazy to be on LinkedIn. So let me just address those really quickly. So Facebook and Instagram are very, very different social media channels. As I just mentioned, they do have their purposes, but they are by no means a substitute for participation on LinkedIn. The second thing I would just like to mention to address the excuse about private funds, LinkedIn is not a channel to communicate your private fund or any specific investment products. Keep in mind, LinkedIn is an important tool for branding, but you need to separate those. And we're going to delve into that a little more later. But I would just like to say the consequences of missing out on LinkedIn are significant. So don't let that go.
Thank you, Holly, for sharing all of that great advice. It does sound like something fund managers really can do, and that there are consequences to not doing it. But let's move on to the next part about when to use LinkedIn. A lot of people think that maybe I have to do it every day. But let me start with the most basic question. What's the best time to either start or re-engage if I used to do it and I don't do it anymore?
Very important question. Quick answer, start now. There's no time like now. Consider the often quoted age-old question, if not now, when? And whether that's establishing your profile for the first time or deciding to make updates and re-engage, start now.
Right. Okay. Now let's move on to, I know this is sometimes a difficult thing to talk about for folks. Again, they think there might be an idea that I have to do it like almost every 20 minutes. What's your advice on frequency of how often the profile should be updated?
Great question. And we are going to separate the frequency of the profile versus your activity feed. So starting with
Okay.
your profile, think of what activities in your life, your professional life, should trigger an update. So it's pretty straightforward. So if you change your business, your employer, you go to a new employer, you modify your position, you get a promotion, or you begin to initiate a new volunteer experience, or you receive and complete a professional credential. Those are all activities that should trigger a profile update.
So that makes sense on my profile, but you already mentioned the feed. When should I be posting new things on my feed?
Fresh content in your activity feed is really more an art than a science. So it's not as cut and dry as the profile update. There's no strict frequency rule. Influencers might post daily or many times a day. I mean, there are people who I see on LinkedIn that are, I'm going to say, many times a day posting some kind of an update. But that's probably not practical for you if you're managing or working in a private fund. So I would suggest some timeline in a range between weekly and monthly. That's not
Okay.
that hard. We're not suggesting writing a book or publishing a white paper. So the post that you make is fresh quality content is key to quality visibility. So the post that you make may include either curating from your network and sharing or something new. But regardless of that, weekly or monthly is not, I think, a huge order.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm feeling a little bit more comfortable about when, but we do need to move into the how. I know there's a lot to say here, so let's just start with kind of the basics. I know that you have some objectives that we should think about first before we jump into the how. Can you talk to us about really this results-driven roadmap advice that you give a lot of fund managers?
Sure. And just by way of background, I would say a roadmap should have an objective result. We're talking about a beginning, a middle, and an end, like a journey or a story. So let me just start with the three top reasons to revisit from the why you're on LinkedIn. You need to focus on the importance of networking, credibility, and expectation. So starting at the beginning, let's just review three important roadmap objectives. The first is relationships. LinkedIn should be used by you to build relationships. And keep in mind that those relationships are not just directly with investors, they should also be with your peers, with competitors. We're all in a industry community. So think about community building, if you will. They should also include relationships with your service providers, your accounting firm. If you don't have a relationship with Richie May on LinkedIn, you should. It should include your counterparties and your investors. So capital raising and retention are very challenging. And investors like to and prefer to do business with people they like and trust. So this whole relationship building process is a process. It's not just a one-time start and finish activity. Secondly, I'd like to just pop into differentiation. We talked about branding. And I would just suggest keeping in mind that people and personalities are way more memorable than rates of return. So your source of differentiation, certainly on LinkedIn, is not going to be about your performance data, but your profile can be a valuable source of differentiation. This is a great opportunity to develop trust and communicate using qualitative content, again, not your fun metrics. The third results-oriented area to just touch on for this roadmap is creating awareness and raising your awareness. So think of LinkedIn as not just a general communication channel, but a PR tool to help you build and raise awareness of you professionally and of your business.
Perfect. Now, before we jump into the details on the how, I do have a question that I hear a lot about. What's the difference between passive and active participation on LinkedIn?
They're different, but they overlap. Just briefly, starting with the passive part of LinkedIn, let's take as an example someone whose profile hasn't been updated in 3 to 5 years. That may sound crazy, but I actually come across that with people in the industry, and I'm horrified, I'm taken aback, but that's a reality. So a passive LinkedIn participation would reflect an outdated profile, and you haven't really bothered to expand your connections. You haven't shared content. That's sort of a half-baked LinkedIn presence.
Right.
By contrast, an active LinkedIn presence means that your profile is current and it's informative, and you're in charge. What do you need to do? You need to regularly monitor the activity feeds of your connections. Remember, we talked about engaging with your peers. So your connections should include some of your peers, call them competitors, peers, or whatever, but you should engage with them. And moreover, if you're an active participant, you are using those tracking tools. We did talk about ROA. So the challenge is for you to pay attention, take a look at those tracking tools, because knowledge is power. Use this social platform actively, and that'll help you view more content and raise your awareness.
So I know that seeing my content and being making sure that others see my content has to do with that gnarly little thing called the LinkedIn algorithm. Can you real quick for us just kind of break down what that algorithm looks like, what it looks for? Because I think that will really kind of inform that roadmap that you're going to talk about in just a moment. Is that correct?
It is very correct. And you should know that we don't have any control over the algorithms, whether you're talking about Google searching or LinkedIn, content feeds. LinkedIn controls its own algorithms. Let me just jump in with a few things that I read recently, and those algorithms do change. Pay attention, because this could change in a month or in a year. So I'm just going to go down a quick list of some things that I found from some research. The first is frequency matters. Again, if you're passive and your information is ancient, it's infrequent. The second algorithm note is about comments. What I read is that using 10 or more words in your comments can increase engagement.
Okay.
The third is short sentences. So when you post, you should post in short sentences. Why? Because they're more readable than a long run-on sentence. Include a hook in your post so that people understand right up front, like an executive summary, what's the post about? The next algorithm tip is questions. Questions are a great, call them a trick or a teaser. Ask questions to stimulate discussion. The next is, there are posting enhancements. What are they? Photos, videos, infographics, questions, polls. these may sound challenging, but I'm just telling you that LinkedIn algorithms love those enhancements. And the last
Perfect.
comment is that emojis and likes alone are not big for engagement impact. Those don't count a lot in the algorithms. Sorry.
I knew you were going to say that. We have a lot of people that we ask to do that, and you've really helped me understand that. So I really appreciate that in-depth look at the algorithm. I want to get into kind of the meat of your advice. So let's really break down using that rule of three, how to use this. So again, let's start at the beginning, the profile. Can you give us 3 tips that we should be looking at when we talk about our profile?
Absolutely. Here they go. First, you need to use 3 relevant graphics. What are they? They're very straightforward. 1, include your profile headshot. 2, include a header image. What's a header image? It's a graphic that's relevant to you or your business. And the third is your company logo. Your company logo should appear next to the top line of your current and most recent experience. For each of these, I would encourage you, if not urge you, to pay attention to LinkedIn's file sizing and formatting recommendations. All right, you sound if you sound overwhelmed or you feel overwhelmed by that comment, it's actually very easy. Just go to LinkedIn Help and ask what are those formatting and file sizing recommendations, and you'll find them quickly.
Okay. Is there anything about the other tips before we move on to traps that you want to talk about? Because I know you have some traps.
Sure. So before we go to those, I would also urge you to, in your profile, develop an about section. And we're not talking about writing a book or a white paper. We're talking about something very brief, like 70 to 75 characters, which equates to about 10-ish words. But just that briefly, just put some kind of a quick synopsis under your name so that people know who you are, what you do. It's kind of like a little tagline type of thing. And the last thing, the third and final very important profile tip is maximize your visibility settings. Why? LinkedIn is not about hiding, and LinkedIn doesn't help you if you hide. So maximize those visibility settings.
So true. Okay, now let's move on to the traps, things to avoid.
The first on my list is, as I alluded to previously, LinkedIn is not a platform to promote your investment vehicle. Therefore, the first trap, avoid specifying any private funds or investment vehicles. By the way, there is a very specific exception under the SEC Rule 506C of Regulation D, but there are critical facts and circumstances. You must consult your legal or compliance counsel before taking this path. So rule of thumb, just don't go down that path of promotion without very good legal advice. And the second trap, which unfortunately is pretty common, I've seen this quite a few times among my clients and others, avoid multiple LinkedIn profiles. Why? It's confusing. Don't do that to your LinkedIn viewers. And so what do you do about that? You merge them into a single account. Again, does that sound overwhelming? Just go into LinkedIn Help and look for how to consolidate multiple profiles.
Perfect, because it's easy to forget that you've already done it if you've been very passive on LinkedIn. So those tools really help identify that. Okay, so that's the profile. I want to move on to this fresh content that you told me I need to do monthly, maybe weekly, every 2 weeks, something like that. But again, let's review the objectives and some best practices before we get into it. Can you talk us through that to begin?
Sure. And let's keep this very sort of hands-on with practical takeaways. So my first suggestion is I would encourage you to stay abreast of activity among your contacts. And again, it's your prospects, your competitors, other organizations you follow, review what other people are updating. So keep track of what's happening out there. And most importantly, you should participate in conversations to create engagement. The easiest engagement is a like, but remember from that little chat about algorithms, a like is not as effective as a comment. So before you post, check what's happening out there and comment. As part of that, the best practices for reposting, including comments in your repost rather than just a straight post. And I'd like to add one other tip, and this is very practical, but very effective. In all of your reposts or your original posts, you should be tagging the people and the companies that are relevant to your repost. It's best practices, it's polite, it's a way to create engagement, and it's the only way that those folks will actually find you and maybe continue your conversation. So make sure that you use that @ before the name of the person or the company, and then add a few relevant hashtags. And the hashtags should cover topics such as hashtag alternative investments or hashtag thought leadership. Those are easy to do, but very important.
Okay, now let's go. I know you told me when, but let's talk about the priorities and the types of fresh content I should be putting in my feed.
I'd like to share a short list. I have actually 6 very important types or examples of content that you should be posting in LinkedIn. And these are not esoteric, they're very straightforward. Number 1, company announcements. If your company has, for example, moved its office, if it's added an office in a new location, if it's hired new people, I could go on, but these are all very factual company announcements. Those are all LinkedIn worthy, LinkedIn critical. The second is your own professional news. Again, if you've changed your employer or your position, that's a LinkedIn announcement. Third, industry development. So go beyond the narrow path of what you do and what your company does. But if there are developments in the industry, whether it's some trend out there or something you read or industry events, those are all LinkedIn worthy. And then another idea and an option that's very viable that I've heard is extremely effective is career tips. So if you've recently had a promotion and perhaps you felt like, some kind of interaction either with one of your peers or your boss or something you did is particularly responsible for that, and you can share that with someone, career tips, people love that. Here's another idea, a spotlight on your team members. So if you manage a team and you want to give them some further recognition, I think that's just a great way to show humanity, caring, empathy, to be a person instead of just a professional expert. So, those human elements are a great source of LinkedIn post. Lastly, remember we talked about questions. Questions are a great format to elicit engagement. So come up with a question about, what do people think of some industry development or some news item? Use it, pop a question into your LinkedIn feed. Those are all very specific, practical content types that I would suggest.
Perfect. That does break it down and make it easier to think about doing this again, either bi-weekly, monthly. You're not asking me to do it every day as a fund manager. And I think that's a common misconception out there because people are posting a lot. And we're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, I really want to talk about something called thought leadership. Can you share what thought leadership is, why bother with it, and how it helps me as a fund manager?
Absolutely. And I strongly encourage folks to think about and act on thought leadership opportunities, because that's a great alignment with LinkedIn as a channel. I would view thought leadership as both an action and process. So it's the overlap of knowledgeable insights and the process of communicating them.
Okay.
Again, you need to have something to communicate for it to be thought leadership. It involves sharing your subject matter expertise. Why bother? Well, thought leadership is very, very important as a factor in establishing you and your firm as an authority in a specific niche or topic. We talked about credibility and trust and relationship development. Think of thought leadership as your most important ticket to establishing those objectives. And what's the importance of LinkedIn? Well, LinkedIn provides a great platform for thought leadership. And you can either be a creator or a curator of thought leadership. Again, don't be overwhelmed by what it sounds like thought leadership requires, because for example, if you read an article about a specific industry sector, what's happening in the real estate market, or what's happening in some specific energy subsector of commodities, those, I'm just giving you some quick examples, those are a great source of content, if relevant to what you do in your business, to share with comments. And why comments? Because you can share your insights, your expertise, and that helps establish you as a thought leader. And I highly recommend taking advantage of this type of opportunity.
I love those ideas. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what I referenced, is that, that this common misconception is that I have to do what other people are doing. And sometimes that's not the right thing. I have noticed that in LinkedIn, there's a lot more about personal news. There's a lot more lately of people kind of posting all sorts of things. So I just have some basic questions for you. Should I be talking and posting about my certifications or my volunteer types of things? And if that's so, what should I be leaving out? Can you help us understand kind of where that line is? And I don't need to be like everyone else. And I don't think that that's what a fund manager should do. Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. However, it's more an art than a science. And I would definitely encourage including in your profile updates and your posts relevant volunteer experience. So for example, if you sit on the board of an organization that promotes, let's see, it's wildlife or birding or some kind of activity in climate change, that is absolutely within your purview to include on LinkedIn. Or if you lead a group that helps fight food insecurity, which happens to be near and dear to me, yes, by all means, include that in your volunteer section. And LinkedIn makes it very easy. It's sort of like resume section. So in LinkedIn, in your profile, there is a volunteer section. So just click on the plus, the ad, the volunteering, and update those sections. Because if you've done something relevant, maybe you've organized one of the fundraisers for that organization, by all means, include that, because we're all human beings. And LinkedIn, by the way, has become, I'm going to say, much more human in the last few years, perhaps because of COVID and people working remotely and other factors.
Right.
So yes to volunteering. Definitely yes to professional certifications. If you've received an additional financial related certification, absolutely include that in your LinkedIn profile, or make a post about it as an update. But here's where I would draw the line. Sometimes LinkedIn feels too personal. And when I read about someone's birth of a child or relative's wedding celebration, maybe that's over the line. Not everyone would agree with that, but that could be the line in the sand, where maybe those announcements, yes, for Facebook, yes, for Instagram, but perhaps not for LinkedIn.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. You've just given us some really great tips, really broken it down. Can you just sum this up for us? Maybe just a real quick review of everything. You've given a lot of confidence in something that can seem a little bit overwhelming.
It's not overwhelming. It is important. As a matter of fact, LinkedIn is the most credible business communication channel. Just process that and use that as your rationale for not missing out. When to use LinkedIn? It's a continuous, ongoing process. I would highly encourage you to consider the need to relate to LinkedIn and engage with LinkedIn in some level of regularity. Quite honestly, I know people are challenged by this. Some are overwhelmed. I have clients who are overwhelmed and they outsource that posting to me because it's just too much for them or they can't be bothered. So if you can't do it, try outsourcing your LinkedIn profile and posts. That's actually a pretty easy process. And the how, I think we've talked about a roadmap and some of the highlights of that roadmap. Review what others are doing, curate content, post content, and one last final tip, which I neglected to mention, but it's really important. If you post text, it's much better to accompany that text with something visual, a
Right, right.
graphic, a photo, or a video. Why? Because we're in the visual and the YouTube generation, and people love to watch, they love to listen, they don't love to read. So give them something to accompany the reading. Thank you.
That's so true. Well, Holly, thank you so much for sharing all of this wisdom. I know that fund managers really appreciate your services and being able to break it down this easy. Thank you so much for being with us today. And I assume if I click that link, I'll go to your LinkedIn profile. Is that correct?
It should be, and I'm happy to help if there's an opportunity for us to, work with any of your clients or otherwise. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here, Holly, and being a part of this Richie May Capital Raising Education Series. And we will talk to you, I'm sure, at some point in the future because you've got a lot of knowledge to share, and we really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me here today.
Thank you, Holly.